Aries, pause for a second before you scroll. Before you tell yourself this is just another video. There is a reason you're here right now, not because you're chasing money, not because you're looking for reassurance, but because somewhere deep down you've been wondering, why does it suddenly feel like something is lining up quietly? This isn't about luck. It's about being chosen after a long season of standing alone, about realizing that the strength you built in silence is starting to create a kind of safety you've never had before. And if that sentence made your chest tighten just a little, leave a comment and say, I'm ready. Not for me, for yourself, because what's forming around you now isn't loud. It's subtle, intentional, protective. And once you see why it's happening, you'll understand this moment wasn't random at all. There's a quiet difference between being noticed and being remembered. And lately, it feels like you've crossed that line without trying to. Not because you demanded attention, but because the way you carry yourself now leaves an imprint after you're gone. You've changed in a way that doesn't announce itself. Your energy doesn't rush the room anymore. It steadies it. And that's new for you. I keep sensing that your name comes up when people talk about trust, about reliability, about someone who didn't disappear when things got complicated. Have you felt that shift inside yourself too, where strength no longer needs to prove anything? There's a certain stillness around you now, the kind that only forms after you've been tested, after you've been disappointed enough times to stop reacting. You didn't harden, you refined. And in that refinement, something subtle began to build. Not excitement, not chaos, but a sense of being quietly held by life, even when no one is standing next to you. I want you to notice how different this feels from the past. Before, momentum was everything. You moved fast because standing still felt unsafe. Now, there's a pause in you that feels intentional, like you finally understand that rushing isn't the same as moving forward. That pause is where clarity lives. It's where people begin to see you not just as capable, but dependable. And that kind of perception changes how doors open around you, even when you're not knocking. There's also a tenderness here that you don't talk about much, a quiet awareness that you've been carrying more than you let on, responsibilities that weren't officially yours, emotional weight you absorbed so others wouldn't have to. When was the last time someone truly checked on how you were holding up? What's forming around you now feels like a response to that unspoken endurance, not a reward, more like a recalibration, life adjusting the balance so you don't have to keep surviving on willpower alone. I see moments ahead where you'll feel a strange sense of relief without immediately knowing why. Like the background noise in your mind has softened, like you're not bracing for impact anymore. Just breathing and realizing the ground under you feels steadier than it used to. That steadiness invites reflection. It asks you to consider a different way of living, one where you don't have to be the first to arrive or the last to leave, one where your value isn't measured by how much you endure in silence. And here's something worth sitting with. The people who recognize your worth now aren't drawn to your fire. They're drawn to your consistency, to the way you show up without needing recognition. Does that surprise you, how different this version of strength feels? This is where curiosity begins to replace urgency, where you start sensing that something meaningful is aligning behind the scenes, not to elevate you above others, but to support you more evenly, to give you room to build a future that doesn't exhaust you just to maintain it. As this awareness settles in, let it. You don't need to define it yet. You don't need to explain it to anyone. Just notice how your inner world feels a little quieter, a little safer than it did before. And if you listen closely to that quiet, you might realize it's not emptiness at all. It's space. The kind of space where something lasting can finally take shape. There's a particular kind of strength you carry that doesn't get talked about much. It's not the loud kind. It's the kind that notices who's standing at the edge of the room, who hasn't spoken yet, who's quietly holding everything together. You've always known how to move forward. That part of you is instinctive. But what's less obvious is how carefully you move around others, how you measure your impact, how you pause before stepping ahead just to make sure no one gets pushed aside. That sense of fairness didn't come from theory. It came from experience, from moments when you could have taken more, said less, walked away cleaner. And you didn't. You chose clarity over convenience, decency over advantage. There were times you showed up for someone when it would have been easier to stay silent, not with dramatic gestures, just steady presence. A call returned. Time given when you were already stretched thin, respect offered without expecting it back. You might not even think of those moments as anything special. To you, they were just the right thing to do. But to someone else, they became a reference point, a quiet reminder that integrity still exists. Have you ever considered how deeply people remember the way you treated them when they had nothing to offer in return? There's a calm dignity in that. And it's changed the way people see you, even if they never say it out loud. You're not just someone who gets things done. You're someone who can be trusted with weight, with responsibility, with decisions that affect more than just the surface. That kind of trust doesn't announce itself. It accumulates, slowly, like water filling a deep well. You don't notice it rising until one day you realize you're not as thirsty as you used to be. What's interesting is how this has softened you without making you smaller. You still have fire, but now it's controlled. It warms instead of burns. It lights the way instead of scorching the ground behind you. There's also an emotional maturity settling in that feels new. A willingness to see the full picture, even when it complicates things. You don't rush to judgment the way you once did. You listen longer. You weigh context. You understand that people act from wounds as often as they act from intention. That understanding hasn't made you passive, it's made you precise. You know when to step in and when to step back, when to offer help and when to let someone find their own footing. Isn't it strange how this quieter form of leadership feels more powerful than force ever did? There's something healing in realizing that your value isn't tied to how hard you push or how much you sacrifice. It's tied to how consistently you show up as yourself, fair, grounded, clear. And even if you've forgotten some of the good you've done, it hasn't been erased. It's still moving through other people's lives in ways you may never fully see. The energy doesn't disappear. It circles back, not as praise or recognition, but as stability, as support, as a sense that when you finally slow down, the world won't collapse without you holding it up. Let that settle for a moment, not as a conclusion, just as an opening. As that sense settles, something else becomes noticeable, a subtle pressure easing. Not because problems vanished, but because you are no longer carrying everything alone. Some of the most important choices in life are never announced. They happen behind closed doors, in quiet conversations, in moments when someone pauses and thinks carefully about consequences, about people, about responsibility. That is the kind of space your name seems to occupy now, not spoken with urgency, spoken with consideration. You may not see the movement yet, and that is part of what makes it feel unfamiliar. Protection does not always arrive as a shield raised in front of you. Sometimes it forms behind you, steady and patient, making sure the ground does not give way when you finally rest your weight. This feels different from support you have known before. It is not conditional. It is not emotional bargaining. It is practical, quiet, measured. There is a dignity in being trusted with stability. Not handed something out of pity, but considered capable of holding it without losing yourself. That kind of confidence from others is rare. It grows from watching how you behave when no one is watching. You have a history of handling pressure without complaint, of adapting without asking for rescue, of finding solutions while everyone else is still reacting. Over time, that leaves an impression deeper than charisma ever could. And here is where the emotional shift happens. For once, the universe does not feel like it is testing your endurance. It feels like it is acknowledging it. This is not about sudden fortune or dramatic turns. It is about relief arriving quietly, about realizing that you may not need to keep living in a constant state of readiness, that you are allowed to build something that does not depend on adrenaline to survive. There is also a sense of respect woven into this moment, respect for how you handle power, for how you do not rush to dominate or control when given leverage, for how you understand that true strength is knowing when enough is enough. That understanding makes people think differently about your future. They see longevity. They see responsibility. They see someone who can protect what matters, not just acquire it. You might feel this as a softening in your chest, a quiet permission to slow your breath, to imagine a life where security is not something you chase, but something you maintain with care. And there is an emotional comfort forming alongside it, the kind that lets you sleep deeper, the kind that reminds you that you are not alone in the long term, even if you have walked alone for a long time. There is nothing you need to do to force this, no performance required, no proof demanded, just awareness. Awareness that the way you live has consequences beyond the present moment, that your integrity has weight, that someone, somewhere, is factoring you into a future plan because you make things safer by being yourself. How does it feel to consider that your steadiness may be inviting support rather than resistance? Let that question rest without needing an answer right away. Some realizations work quietly, just like the protection forming around you now. There's a quiet contrast becoming clearer now, and it doesn't arrive with drama. It arrives with understanding. You can sense that not every path unfolds the same way, even when two people start from a similar place. Some choices look powerful at first, confident, convincing. They promise speed, control, or recognition, and for a while, it can seem like those choices are working. But time has a way of revealing what motivation was really underneath. And lately, you may have noticed how someone else's certainty has begun to feel heavy instead of freeing. How the confidence they once carried now looks strained, like it needs constant reinforcement just to stay upright. This isn't about judgment, it's about perspective. You didn't win because you outpaced them. You didn't succeed because you proved anything. You simply didn't abandon yourself when the direction felt wrong. That difference matters more than it seems. Some people move forward by overriding their inner signals. They silence discomfort. They justify compromises. They tell themselves it will all make sense later. And later comes, quietly, with questions they didn't prepare for. You can feel the weight of that realization in the air now, not as gossip, not as satisfaction, just as a calm awareness that their disappointment belongs to them. It was shaped by decisions made in haste, by values bent instead of honored, by choosing what looked strong over what felt true. And the reason this matters to you isn't comparison, it's confirmation. Confirmation that the unease you once felt was real, that the hesitation you honored wasn't weakness, it was discernment. You stood at a crossroads where clarity wasn't guaranteed. You didn't have proof. You didn't have applause. You only had a sense that continuing would cost you something you weren't willing to lose. So you stepped away. Not loudly, not to be understood, just honestly. That honesty has a way of protecting you long after the moment passes. Now, as you watch the consequences unfold elsewhere, there's a subtle emotional shift inside you. Not relief exactly, more like grounding. A sense that your life doesn't need to be validated by someone else's outcome, that your direction holds its own integrity, regardless of how others explain theirs. There may even be a trace of sadness mixed in, because part of you hoped it would work out differently for them. Part of you wanted everyone to land safely. That compassion says a lot about who you are now. But compassion doesn't mean carrying what isn't yours. And you are learning, quietly, how to set that boundary without hardening your heart. This is where maturity shows up in unexpected ways, not in detachment, in clarity. You're able to look at someone else's disappointment without absorbing it, to witness without rescuing, to acknowledge without rewriting your own story. And that frees something inside you. It creates space for your life to move forward without needing contrast or conflict to define it, without needing to be right, without needing to be chosen over someone else. Let me ask you something, gently. When you think back to that moment of uncertainty, that turning point where you chose the quieter path, do you feel regret or do you feel relief? That answer matters. Because the path you're on now isn't shaped by comparison, it's shaped by alignment, by the kind of inner consistency that doesn't unravel when circumstances shift. And as this awareness settles, It doesn't close the story. It deepens it. You're not here because someone else fell behind. You're here because you stayed true when it would have been easier not to. That truth continues to carry you forward, not loudly, not urgently, just steadily. There was a moment, not dramatic, not marked by a final conversation, when you simply knew. The air felt different around you, not hostile, just no longer welcoming. You didn't storm out. You didn't demand understanding. You let the knowing settle in your body, quiet and unmistakable, like a door closing softly behind you while you kept walking forward. Leaving that way takes a particular kind of courage, the kind that doesn't need witnesses, the kind that trusts what can't be proven yet. You carried the weight of that choice alone for a while. No reassurance, no immediate reward. Just a steady inner voice reminding you that staying would have cost you something deeper than comfort. That voice wasn't loud. It didn't rush you. It spoke in sensations, in a tightness that wouldn't release, in a fatigue that sleep couldn't fix, in the subtle grief of outgrowing a place before it outgrew you. Listening to that voice required you to slow down, to resist the urge to explain yourself into acceptance, to let others misunderstand you if that was the price of staying aligned. That's where your growth happened, not in victory, in restraint. You learned that self-respect isn't always about standing your ground. Sometimes it's about knowing when the ground beneath you no longer supports who you're becoming. Walking away quietly changed the way you relate to yourself. You stopped needing permission to evolve, stopped waiting for circumstances to justify your inner truth. You began honoring the signals your body sends long before your mind catches up. There's a tenderness in that kind of maturity, a gentler relationship with your own instincts. You don't override them anymore. You listen, even when listening means uncertainty. That uncertainty taught you patience, not the passive kind, the kind that trusts timing without forcing it, the kind that lets life rearrange itself around your honesty. And here's something important. The door that opened later didn't open because you pushed. It opened because you stopped standing in places that drained you. That shift matters. It's the difference between chasing opportunity and allowing alignment, between proving strength and living from it. You might still remember the loneliness of that transition, the quiet evenings, the unanswered questions, the moments when you wondered if you had made a mistake simply because the path ahead wasn't clear yet. But clarity doesn't always arrive first. Sometimes peace arrives before explanation. Now, when you look back, there's a steadiness in you that wasn't there before. You don't abandon yourself as quickly. You don't negotiate your boundaries just to avoid discomfort. You trust that discomfort can be informative rather than threatening. That trust is shaping your future in subtle ways, not by guaranteeing outcomes, but by changing how you choose. And I want to ask you something, gently, without pressure. When you imagine that version of yourself who stayed, who ignored that inner signal, how does your body respond now? That response tells you everything you need to know. You didn't walk away to be brave. You walked away to be whole. And that wholeness is quietly guiding you forward, even when the path still feels unfinished. There is a softer rhythm entering your life now, and at first, it may feel unfamiliar. Not exciting in the way you were taught to expect, not sharp or urgent, just calm. For someone like you, calm can feel almost suspicious. You're used to moving with tension in your shoulders, a plan always forming, an exit always calculated. Breathing has often been something you do between responsibilities, not something you settle into. But this is different. What's unfolding doesn't ask you to prove anything. It doesn't ask you to stay alert or brace for impact. It offers something simpler and somehow deeper. Room. Room to rest without guilt. Room to pause without falling behind. Room to let your nervous system learn that stability doesn't mean stagnation. You might notice it in small ways first. The way your jaw loosens when you lie down at night. The way you stop replaying conversations that are already over. The way the future feels less like a cliff edge and more like a landscape you can walk through at your own pace. This kind of stability doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives quietly, like a hand placed on your back when you didn't realize you needed support. It reminds you that you don't have to hold everything together with sheer willpower anymore. There's emotional safety forming here too. Not the kind that keeps you comfortable at all costs, but the kind that allows honesty. You're beginning to sense which connections feel steady and which ones drain you. And you're no longer tempted to ignore that difference. Financially, the energy feels similar, not flashy, grounded. It's the feeling of knowing that one unexpected moment won't undo everything you've built, that your life isn't balanced on a single fragile point. This isn't about having more, it's about needing less to feel okay. There's a deep relief in that realization, because so much of your life has been spent preparing for worst-case scenarios. Training yourself to survive instead of settle, to stay sharp instead of soft. Now, something inside you is gently shifting. You're allowing yourself to imagine a future that doesn't require constant defense, a future where your strength can finally rest inside something reliable. And I want to ask you something quietly, without expectation. When was the last time you allowed yourself to feel safe without questioning it? That question may linger for a moment. Let it, because safety doesn't erase who you are. It doesn't dull your fire. It simply gives it a place to burn steadily instead of consuming everything around it. You're learning that stability isn't a cage, it's a foundation, one that lets you build upward instead of always pushing forward. As this settles in, you may feel moments of unexpected emotion, gratitude without a clear source, tears that don't come from sadness, a sense of being cared for by life itself, not in a mystical way, but in a human one. That's your system recalibrating, letting go of survival mode, trusting that you're allowed to exhale. This steadiness doesn't define the rest of your story. It supports it. It gives you a place to stand while you decide what truly matters next. And for the first time in a long while, you don't need to rush that decision. You're breathing now. And that changes everything that comes after. There's a subtle shift that happens after you finally exhale. It changes the way you look at the past without reopening it. You may notice someone from before drifting back into your awareness, not dramatically, not with urgency, just a presence, a message that feels carefully worded, a memory resurfacing at an unexpected moment. When people realize a choice didn't carry them where they thought it would, they often retrace their steps. They remember the places where they felt steady, the people who didn't demand performance, the moments that felt real instead of impressive. And yes, that memory may include you, not because you were perfect, but because you were honest in a way that didn't bend to convenience. If there's an apology, it may come quietly. If there's an invitation to talk, it may sound reasonable, measured, thoughtful, as if clarity alone could soften what time has already reshaped. What matters isn't the words, it's how your body responds to the idea of reopening that door. Because something in you has changed, not hardened, not closed, just repositioned. You no longer stand where you once did, hoping to be understood. You stand where you understand yourself. That makes all the difference. You're not tempted to argue your growth or explain your boundaries. You don't need to prove how far you've come. You simply feel it in the way you pause before responding, in the way you listen without absorbing, in the way you notice when something feels familiar but no longer fits. There's a calm confidence there, not the kind that announces itself, the kind that rests. And here's something important. You don't need to close anything off to move forward. You don't need to hold resentment to protect your progress. You can meet the past with respect without stepping back into it. That's maturity. You're able to say yes to conversation without saying yes to regression, to offer understanding without offering access, to acknowledge history without reliving it. That balance is new for you. Before, movement meant momentum. Forward meant fast. Now, forward feels deliberate, rooted. You've learned that not every reconnection deserves a revival. Some are simply reflections, moments that show you how much you've grown by contrast alone. And I want to ask you something gently. When you imagine that person standing in front of you now, do you feel pulled or do you feel centered? That answer is quiet, but it's honest. You're not afraid of being misunderstood anymore. You're more interested in staying aligned. That's why you don't feel the need to retreat or defend. You don't owe the past a future. And still, there's compassion in you, a real one. You can see how people get lost chasing versions of themselves that look powerful from the outside but feel hollow inside. You don't judge that. You just don't follow it anymore. So if someone circles back, let it be what it is. A moment of recognition, a shared breath of clarity. Nothing more needs to happen unless it feels true to who you are now. You're not closing doors out of fear. You're choosing not to step backward out of self-respect. And that quiet choice carries a strength far deeper than any dramatic ending ever could. You've moved on without severing your humanity. And that's something you'll carry with you, no matter who comes or goes next. There's a tenderness at this point in the journey that feels almost sacred. Not fragile, just honest. When life places something real in front of you, it often comes with details, papers that need to be read slowly, conversations that deserve your full presence, decisions that ask for clarity instead of impulse. This isn't a test. It's an invitation to treat yourself with the same care you've always given others. You've spent so much of your life moving quickly, trusting your instincts to get you through. And they have. But this moment asks for something different, not hesitation, just intention. Protecting yourself doesn't mean expecting harm. It means honoring what you've built. It means recognizing that stability grows best when it's handled with respect and patience. Take your time with anything that touches your future. Read the fine print of situations. Ask the questions you used to skip, not because you're afraid, but because you finally understand your own worth. There's dignity in doing things the right way, even when no one is rushing you, especially then. You didn't arrive here by chance. You arrived here through countless small choices made when no one was applauding, through restraint, through fairness, through walking away when it would have been easier to stay. That kind of life leaves a mark. And now there's a sense that you don't have to keep proving yourself through struggle. You're allowed to receive support without questioning whether you deserve it. You're allowed to build a future that doesn't rely on constant pressure to stay upright. If something comes with responsibility attached, meet it calmly. If it asks for trust, let that trust be mutual. You don't need to rush into anything to secure it. What's meant to be steady can withstand a pause. I want to ask you one last thing, quietly. When you imagine a life where you're not always bracing for the next challenge, what rises first inside? You? Relief? Curiosity? Or something softer you haven't named yet? That response matters. Because this moment isn't about becoming someone new. It's about finally standing where you've always belonged without carrying everything alone. You're still strong, still capable, still decisive. But now there's room around that strength. Space for rest, space for clarity, space for a future that doesn't demand you burn yourself out just to feel secure. And that's the quiet truth beneath all of this. Your name wasn't remembered so you could stand above anyone else. It was remembered because you've shown over time that you know how to stand with integrity, you know how to care for what you touch, for people, for responsibilities, for yourself. Let that be enough. Whatever unfolds next doesn't need to be dramatic to be meaningful. It just needs to feel aligned with the person you've become. You're not walking into this alone anymore, and you don't need to announce that fact for it to be real. Just keep choosing clarity, keep honoring yourself, and let the steadiness you've earned do what it does best: hold you. All right, let's let this land gently. As this journey comes to a pause, notice something small. Your shoulders may be lower than when you arrived here. Your breath may be slower. That matters more than any big sign or loud confirmation. Aries, here's the quiet truth I haven't said yet. Strength doesn't only change what you conquer. Sometimes it changes what no longer needs conquering, and that's when life starts meeting you differently. Before you move on, I want to leave you with a question, not one you answer quickly, just one you carry. What would shift in your life if you trusted that you no longer have to brace yourself all the time? Now, a small reminder. You don't need to speak this out loud. You don't need to explain it to anyone. Some realizations are meant to stay quiet for a while so they can grow roots. Here's a simple inner exercise you can do later tonight. Nothing complicated. When you're alone, place one hand on your chest. Take one slow breath in. Then ask yourself, silently, Where do I feel steady right now, even if everything isn't solved yet? Don't force an answer. Just notice what your body responds with. I'll share something personal with you briefly. There was a time I mistook tension for purpose. I thought if I stopped pushing, everything would fall apart. It didn't. What fell away was only the noise, and maybe that's part of what's happening for you now. If this message touched something real inside you, leave a comment. Even a single word is enough. It helps this space stay alive, and it lets me know you're walking this path with us. And if you feel called, subscribe. Not out of urgency, out of alignment. Trust yourself, Aries, not because you have all the answers, but because you've learned how to listen. The journey doesn't end here. It softens, it deepens, and the next message is already finding its way to you. Until then, stay gentle with your strength.